My own daughter handed me a glass of water and watched me drink it. I didn't know until my wife grabbed my arm in the dark and whispered, "Howard, stop swallowing. I think she's been doing this for weeks." My name is Howard Calloway. I am 68 years old. I spent 35 years as a licensed pharmacist in Raleigh, North Carolina. I spent those years counting pills, reading labels, watching for interactions, keeping people alive. I knew every compound that could heal a body and every compound that could destroy one quietly, slowly, in a way that looked like natural decline. I thought that knowledge made me safe. I thought it made me wise. What I did not realize was that the most dangerous prescription ever filled in my life was written by my own daughter, and she dispensed it with a smile every Sunday when she came for dinner. If you have ever loved someone so completely that you handed them every weapon they needed to destroy you, hit the like button right now, because that is exactly what I did for 32 years. And if you stay with me, I will tell you how I survived it, how I proved it, and how I made sure she spent the rest of her life understanding exactly what she threw away. It started the way all great disasters start, quietly, on a Tuesday. My wife Carol was the one who noticed first, the way wives always do. She noticed it 6 weeks before I would have believed her. She had been watching our daughter Rachel's hands whenever she came over, the way Rachel moved around the kitchen without being invited, the way she refilled drinks before they were empty, the way she always insisted on being the one to bring us our evening tea. Carol said nothing to me for 2 weeks. She was gathering her own evidence, the way a woman who has survived 60 years on this earth learns to do before she says anything that cannot be unsaid. She started quietly pouring her tea into the potted fern on the back porch when Rachel wasn't looking. She watched me drink mine, and she watched my hands begin to shake by Wednesday morning. She watched my balance worsen. She watched me tell my doctor I thought it was inner ear trouble and accept the referral to a specialist with a grateful smile on my face. The night she finally told me, I did not believe her. I sat up in bed, and I looked at my wife of 41 years, and I told her she was imagining things. I told her that Rachel was our daughter. I told her that whatever friction existed between Carol and Rachel over the years was old business, settled business, and I would not hear accusations like that in my own home. Carol did not argue with me. She simply walked to the windowsill and lifted the potted fern. The leaves had turned brown. Half of them were dead. She had been discarding her tea in that pot every Sunday for 2 weeks. She set the plant on the nightstand between us like a piece of evidence on a courtroom table. That started dying the same week Rachel started bringing the tea, Carol said. And then she got back into bed, turned off the light, and said nothing else. I lay in the dark for 4 hours that night. I did the math I did not want to do. The tremors had started about 7 weeks earlier, roughly around the time Rachel began suggesting we spend more weekends at the lake house she and her husband Marcus had been using. The fatigue I had been dismissing as aging, the confusion in the mornings that I had been attributing to poor sleep. I was a pharmacist. I knew what progressive tremors and cognitive fog looked like as a symptom cluster. I had counseled patients through those exact side effects dozens of times. The difference was that when I counseled those patients, I was handing them a bottle with a label that told them exactly what was happening to their body. Someone had removed my label. In the morning, I did not pour my tea into the fern. I poured it into a sealed container I pulled from my old lab kit in the garage. I had not used that kit in 3 years. I sealed the sample. I drove to a private testing lab 2 counties, over where I was not known. I paid cash. I used Carol's maiden name. The results came back in 4 days. Alprazolam, haloperidol, a carefully measured combination, low doses, individually unremarkable, easily dismissed as fatigue or early onset neurological issues in a man my age. Combined over weeks, taken with the other supplements Rachel had been bringing us, supplements she described as imported vitamins from a naturopath she trusted, the interaction would have produced exactly the picture I had been presenting to my doctor. Confused elderly man. Cognitive decline. Possibly early dementia. Possibly Parkinson's adjacent. Hard to diagnose. Easy to document. I sat in my car outside that testing lab for a long time. I was a man of science. I dealt in facts. And the facts in my hand told me that my daughter had been slowly, methodically, pharmacologically dismantling my mind. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. People expect fathers to cry when they learn something like this. I did not cry. What I felt was something much colder and much more precise. It was the feeling I used to get when I caught a prescription error before it reached a patient. A kind of lockdown alertness. A suspension of everything emotional in favor of everything analytical. Something was very wrong and it needed to be fixed before someone got hurt. Someone had already gotten hurt. That someone was me. But I was still standing. I drove home. Carol was in the garden. I sat down beside her on the low brick wall, and I showed her the results. She read them twice. She folded the paper along its original crease, and she handed it back to me without saying a word. Her hands were steady. Mine were not, and we both knew why. We made a decision that afternoon that I believe saved both of our lives. We told no one. We poured every cup of tea and every supplement capsule into containers that went into my old lab storage, labeled and dated. We kept the fern on the windowsill and watched it die as evidence of what had already been administered. And we started watching. The lake house was where it was supposed to end. I understand that now. Rachel had been pushing for a family reunion weekend at the lake house for 2 months. Just family, she kept saying. Just us and the water and some time to reconnect. She said it with such warmth and such ease that I had almost believed her. Almost. But by then I had been sober for 3 weeks, quietly substituting the tea, and my mind was sharpening back to its old edge. The lake house was 40 minutes outside the city, on a private stretch of shoreline that Marcus had purchased 3 years ago as an investment. It was beautiful in the way that isolated places are beautiful, which is to say that it was also quiet in the way that isolated places are quiet. No neighbors close enough to hear anything. No security cameras because Marcus had never installed them. A detail he had mentioned proudly and often, as though privacy were a virtue rather than a vulnerability. I know the property well. I know it because I paid for half of it. Rachel had come to me with a shortfall when they were closing on the purchase, and I had written a check without hesitation because that is what fathers do. I wrote that check, and I patted her on the shoulder, and I told her I was proud of her and Marcus for building something real. I remember how she smiled at me that day. I have thought about that smile many times since. We arrived on a Friday evening in early October. The air off the water was cool and clean, and Rachel had made dinner, something she had never done before at the lake house, always preferring to order out. She had made my favorite braised short ribs and a rhubarb pie that she knew I could not resist since childhood. She was warm and attentive, and she refilled my wine glass twice before I asked her to. Carol barely touched her food. I watched Rachel watch Carol. There was a calculation in Rachel's eyes that lasted only a fraction of a second before her smile returned. But I had been watching for exactly that fraction of a second, and I caught it. Marcus was different that weekend. He had always been a quiet man, the kind of son-in-law who answered questions politely but never initiated conversation. That Friday evening he was almost jovial. He suggested a walk along the dock after dinner. He brought out a bottle of single malt that he knew I admired, and he poured me a generous glass with his own hands and watched me hold it. I set the glass down and I said I was tired. I watched something flicker across his face. Impatience, maybe. A schedule being disrupted. I slept very little that night. At 2 a.m. I heard footsteps on the dock. I lay still, and I listened. 2 voices. I could not hear words, only tone. Rachel's voice was tight and compressed, the voice she used when something was not going according to plan. Marcus responded once in a low, flat register, and then there was silence. I heard the dock creak as they walked back toward the house. I heard the screen door close. Carol's hand found mine in the dark. She had been awake too. "Tomorrow," she whispered. It was not a question. I did not answer her because I did not know what tomorrow meant yet. But I knew it meant something they had decided upon, and we had not been consulted. The next morning I woke early, and I went to the dock alone. The water was silver and still. I stood there looking at the far bank, and I thought about the things a retired pharmacist knows that most people do not. I thought about how a man with documented cognitive decline and a history of morning dizziness might be found face down in a shallow inlet. I thought about how a coroner would read that. I thought about the life insurance policy that Rachel had suggested. Carol and I update 2 years ago, the one she had helped us fill out, the one where both she and Marcus were listed as primary beneficiaries because, she had said then, That was simply the logical arrangement. I thought about my granddaughter, Lily, Rachel and Marcus's daughter, who was 9 years old and who had not been brought on this particular trip. Rachel had said Lily had a school project. I had believed her. Standing on that dock, I understood that Lily's absence was not logistical. It was protective. Not protective of Lily. Protective of the story. A 9-year-old cannot testify to what she did not see. I went back inside and I made coffee and I smiled through breakfast as though the world were completely ordinary. Around mid-morning, Marcus suggested we take the kayaks out. Rachel said she had a headache and would watch from the deck. She would watch from the deck. The words sat in my chest like a stone. She wanted to be a witness, not a participant. She wanted a clear sightline and plausible distance. I told Marcus my knees were bothering me and I had decided to take a walk on the trail behind the house instead. I asked if he wanted to join me. Something moved behind his eyes, a rapid recalculation, before he said yes. We walked the trail for 20 minutes. He tried 3 times to steer us toward the overlook point where the bank dropped sharply to the water below. Each time I found a reason to stop short, to point at something in the tree line, to check my phone. I am not a physical man and Marcus is 15 years younger than me, but I have learned in my life that the body will do extraordinary things when the mind understands exactly what is at stake. My mind understood, very clearly. When we got back to the house, Rachel was on her phone on the deck. She looked up when she heard us, and I watched the question form on her face before she controlled it. She looked at Marcus. He gave the smallest shake of his head. She looked back at her phone. That afternoon, I excused myself to use the bathroom, and I walked instead to the small storage room at the back of the house. I had noticed a combination lock on that door the previous evening, a new addition, something that had not been there the last time Carol and I visited. A man with a degenerating mind would not have noticed. I noticed. I knew Marcus's combination habits because I had helped him set up his home safe 2 years ago, and he had used the same 4 numbers he used for everything, his college graduation year. I tried them. The lock opened on the first attempt. Inside the storage room, behind a stack of folded tarps, was a nylon bag I did not recognize. I unzipped it with the careful fingers of a man who has spent decades handling things precisely. Inside was a laptop, open browser tabs, a private bank account in a name I did not recognize, wire transfers, numbers that made my throat tighten, and beneath the laptop, a folder. Inside the folder, a document I had to read 3 times before my brain would accept what my eyes were seeing. It was a preliminary real estate listing agreement for the lake house, dated 6 weeks earlier. The listing agent was a firm I did not recognize, but the signatures on the authorization line were Rachel's and Marcus's. They were planning to sell the property they had purchased partly with my money, the property they had described as a family anchor, a place for generations. They were selling it, and the proceeds were being directed to an account that bore neither of their names. I photographed everything with my phone. I replaced the folder. I re-zipped the bag. I set the tarps back in place. I relocked the door with shaking hands and I walked back to the bathroom, flushed the toilet for authenticity, and returned to the deck where Rachel was now suggesting we have an early dinner and take the kayaks out at sunset. When the light was, she said, extraordinary. I said that sounded wonderful. We did not get in those kayaks. I feigned a stomach complaint shortly after dinner. Carol played along with the precise calibration of a woman who has spent 41 years as my partner, and we retired early. I lay in the dark bedroom and I heard them arguing in the kitchen below us, their voices too low for words but their tones unmistakable. A plan coming apart, a window closing, the urgency of people who had set a schedule and watched it slip. We left the lake house early the next morning. Rachel stood in the driveway and watched us go with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Marcus stood behind her with his hands in his pockets. I waved from the car window the way a man who suspects nothing would wave. Carol looked straight ahead the entire drive home. That evening I called Daniel Marsh. Daniel had been my closest friend since 1987 when we met at a community board meeting and discovered we shared a conviction that people in positions of public trust should be held to an impossible standard. Daniel had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant for the State Attorney General's office. He was retired now, same as me, and he was sharper than anyone half his age and twice as motivated when he smelled something rotten. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill most people never develop. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Howard, how long have you been sitting on the lab results?" 3 weeks, I told him. "And the photos from the storage room?" "Since yesterday." He exhaled slowly. "You know what this is, don't you? This isn't just a poisoning. This is a financial extraction plan. The cognitive decline documentation sets up a competency challenge. If you're declared incompetent, Rachel becomes your conservator. She controls your assets without waiting for you to die. The lake house sale, the wire transfers. She's been moving money into a position where she can access it regardless of your status." I had suspected this. Hearing it stated plainly by someone with 30 years of forensic accounting experience made it land differently. "There's something else," I told him. I told him about the account name on the wire transfers, the one that belonged to neither Rachel nor Marcus. He asked me to send him the photos. 20 minutes after I did, he called me back. "That account," he said, and his voice had changed into the tone I recognized from years of watching him work, "belongs to a man named Colton Briggs. He's Rachel's business partner in the interior design firm she opened 2 years ago. Howard, I'm looking at his financial history right now. This man has done this before. Different city, different woman, same structure. He's very good at it." I sat down. "Rachel doesn't know," Daniel said carefully. "I don't think she knows that the account she believes is theirs jointly is actually solely in his name. She thinks she's building a future with him. She's actually building his." I had absorbed a great deal in the past 3 weeks. I had absorbed the lab results and the storage room and the real estate listing. I sat with this new piece for a long moment, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage, not satisfaction. Something much harder and much more honest. I felt grief. Because my daughter was a fool, and a criminal, and a danger to the people who had loved her most. But she was also being played by a man who was far better at this than she was. And some small damaged part of me that was still her father could not help noticing that she was going to lose everything too. She just did not know it yet. Daniel and I worked for 2 weeks before we moved. He called in favors with 2 former colleagues at the State Attorney General's office. A financial crimes investigator who owed him a significant professional debt. A forensic accountant currently on staff who agreed, off the record, to review what we had assembled. Meanwhile, I recorded every phone call Rachel made to me. In North Carolina, you need only one party's consent to record a conversation. I was that party. Rachel called me twice a week to check on my health, which I now understood meant to monitor the effectiveness of the dosing she believed was still occurring. I let her believe it was. I slurred slightly at the right moments. I repeated myself once or twice per call. I told her I had mixed up my medication appointments, and she made the appropriate noises of concerned daughterly alarm. In the 3rd week, Carol did something that I still consider the most precise act of courage I have ever witnessed. She called Rachel and asked her to come over for lunch, just the 2 of them, woman to woman, because Carol said she was worried about me and needed someone to talk to. Rachel arrived within the hour. She sat across from Carol at our kitchen table and held Carol's hand and spoke with such tender, measured sympathy about the difficulty of watching a husband decline that I, listening from the hallway with my phone recording, had to press my back against the wall and close my eyes. Rachel told Carol that they had been researching memory care facilities. She said she had found one she thought was excellent. She said it was expensive, but that they were prepared to help with the costs. She said she just wanted what was best for me, for both of us, and that Carol should not have to carry this burden alone. She said it with such conviction that, for one terrible second, I wondered if she believed it herself. Then she asked Carol, gently, if I had updated my medical power of attorney recently. Carol said she wasn't sure. Rachel suggested that might be something to get sorted soon, while things were still clear, because waiting too long could complicate everything. That was the recording that closed the case. Daniel filed the materials with his contact at the Attorney General's office on a Thursday. A sealed investigation opened that same afternoon. The Financial Crimes Unit had already been looking at Colton Briggs in connection with a similar situation in Georgia 2 years prior. Our documentation gave them what they had been missing: a specific account, a specific timeline, a specific victim who was alive and articulate and had preserved his own evidence. We were asked to do nothing for 10 days. 10 days of Sunday dinners and phone calls and nodding at the memory care facility brochures Rachel left on our coffee table. 10 days of Carol making tea and pouring it into labeled containers. 10 days of me answering Rachel's careful questions about how I was feeling with answers, designed to reassure her that the schedule was still holding. The morning the investigators moved, I was standing at my kitchen window watching the bird feeders Carol had hung in the oak tree when my phone rang. It was Daniel. He said 2 words. "It's done." They arrested Colton Briggs at his office. They arrested Marcus at the lake house, where he had been spending an increasing amount of time, presumably managing the sale timeline. They served Rachel at our front door, which I watched from the hallway window with a cup of actual untampered coffee, the first one I had permitted myself in weeks. She looked at the officers with the expression of a person whose entire understanding of reality has just been surgically removed. She looked past them, down the front walk, and she saw me standing in the window. I did not move. I did not look away. I let her see exactly who I was, exactly what I had done, and exactly what I was not going to do, which was cry. They took her down the front walk, and I watched until the car doors closed. Inside the house, Carol was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her. She had not watched from the window. She had sat at the table where she had held Rachel as a crying infant, where she had helped her with algebra homework, where she had listened to every heartbreak and every triumph for 32 years. She was very still. I sat down across from her. Neither of us spoke for a while. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses become quiet when something enormous has just left them. "She'll have a lawyer," Carol said finally. "She will," I agreed. "She'll say you manipulated the evidence. She'll say your mind wasn't right." "She can say it," I said. "The lab doesn't lie. The recordings don't lie. The financial trail doesn't lie." I paused. "The fern doesn't lie." Carol looked at me for a long moment and then she laughed. It was a small, exhausted, completely genuine laugh, the kind that comes out when there is nothing left to perform for anyone. I reached across the table, and I took her hands the way I had taken them 41 years ago at an altar in a church in Raleigh, North Carolina, in front of everyone who had believed we were a good match. Most of them had been right. There is a particular kind of pain that comes specifically from betrayal by a child. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect fathers to cover that pain with anger, and I am not going to do that here. The anger was real, and it was earned, and it will never fully leave me. But underneath the anger was something that felt like the death of a person who was still alive, a grief with no funeral, no ceremony, no casserole dishes brought by neighbors, just the daily, ongoing reality of a daughter who sat at your table and watched you drink what she had prepared for you and felt nothing that you would recognize as love. I did not attend the preliminary hearings. My attorney handled the relevant testimony. Daniel managed the financial documentation with the precision of a man who was, by his own admission, more energized than he had been in a decade. The case against Colton Briggs expanded rapidly once investigators had access to his account records. 2 women in 2 other states were identified. One of them had not been as fortunate as Carol and I. She was still in the process of recovery from a conservatorship that had been improperly established, and our case provided the documentation her attorney had been searching for. Rachel's defense argued that she had been manipulated by Briggs, that she had not understood the full scope of what he was doing, that she had believed the plan was simply to establish a conservatorship for my genuine benefit given my apparent cognitive decline. The prosecutors played the recording of her kitchen conversation with Carol. The part about the medical power of attorney played particularly well, I was told. Marcus cooperated immediately, as men like Marcus always do when faced with the specific and undeniable. He provided testimony about Briggs's operational structure in exchange for reduced charges. This was, ultimately, the piece that sealed the case against Briggs completely. There is one other thing I need to tell you, and it is the thing I think about most. 3 days after the arrests, my granddaughter Lily came to our house. Her maternal grandmother on Marcus's side had been caring for her since the news broke. She arrived on a Saturday morning carrying a backpack and wearing the expression of a 9-year-old who has been told large pieces of terrible information in careful and insufficient doses. She sat at our kitchen table in the same chair where Rachel had sat across from Carol. She ate a bowl of cereal. She looked at me very directly in the way that children look at adults when they are trying to determine whether the adult is going to be honest with them. "Is my mom coming home?" she asked. I looked at that child. I thought about every honest thing I had ever said in my life, and whether any of them had been as important as the next thing I was about to say. Not for a while, I told her. But you are, if you want to be. This is your home too, as long as you need it. She nodded once, the same way Carol nods when something has been settled. She is still here. She has her own room now, the one that used to be the guest room, the one Carol filled with things that a 9-year-old who has recently lost her compass might need. Books, a lamp with a warm bulb, a plant on the windowsill that Carol waters every morning, a healthy one this time. I am not going to tell you that everything is fine. I am going to tell you the truth, which is that some days the grief of what Rachel chose is heavier than the relief of having survived it. I am going to tell you that I still reach for the phone some Sunday mornings out of 41 years of habit before I remember that the person I would be calling is not available. I am going to tell you that Carol and I have had long, quiet evenings where neither of us speaks and both of us are present, and that this has turned out to be enough. We sold our house in Raleigh. We bought a smaller place on the coast, close enough to water that Carol can see it from the kitchen window when she drinks her coffee in the morning. Actual coffee. She makes it herself. My hands have almost completely stopped shaking. The pharmacist in me knows that is the compound clearing. The father in me knows that is something else clearing too. Something that had been administered over a long time by someone I trusted, and that is, finally, working its way out of my system. If you have ever loved someone so completely that their betrayal didn't just break your heart but rewrote your entire understanding of yourself, you know what I am describing. And if you have survived it, if you have looked at the evidence and refused to let the grief make you its permanent address, then you also know what I am going to say next. You do not stop loving people by protecting yourself from them. Love and self-preservation are not opposites. A man who spent 35 years keeping people safe from dangerous compounds should have understood that sooner. I understand it now. I am a slow learner, but I am thorough. Daniel came to visit last month. He sat on our back porch with a glass of iced tea. Real tea. Nothing in it but tea. And he looked out at the water and he said, "You know what the most impressive thing you did was? Not the lab test. Not the recording. Not the storage room. It was the 2 weeks you kept showing up for Sunday dinner after you knew." I thought about that. "That was Carol," I said. He laughed. "You're a team." We are. 41 years is a long time to build something that can hold weight. It held. That is what I want you to remember from all of this. Whatever it is that someone is doing to you, whoever is standing at the counter mixing something into the cup they are handing you with a smile, you are allowed to see it. You are allowed to document it. You are allowed to protect yourself and the people you love and the life you built with your own hands. Biology is not destiny. A name on a birth certificate is not a guarantee. The people who deserve your trust are the ones who have never required you to stop paying attention in order to believe in them. My name is Howard Calloway. I am 68 years old. I am a retired pharmacist, and I can tell you with complete professional confidence that the most important thing you will ever do for your health is know exactly what you are being given, who is giving it to you, and why. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever had to choose between loving someone and surviving them. I read every single one. You are not alone in this. None of us are. And if you have a Lily in your life, a child who did nothing wrong and lost everything anyway, hold on to that. Take care of that. That is the whole point of everything we endure. That is the whole reason we fight back instead of giving up. To my granddaughter, if you ever hear this someday, the fern on your windowsill is doing just fine. So are we.